Thanks everyone for coming. By the way, my talk, as you heard, is called 82 bugs I collected in a year you won't believe made it to production. And you can see this was, by the way, my view from my hotel room. I got thankfully upgraded, and I was able to take this nice picture for you. So, you know, I thought I'd show it to you so you can enjoy it a bit too. I've really enjoyed my time here in Chicago. I came here over for KCDC last week, another conference I can really recommend you going if you have some time at some point. I don't know, was someone of you at KCDC? Yeah, I mean, Mary, of course, yeah. Yeah, maybe next year, who knows, right? Yeah. But yeah, so by the way, you know, I already have to make an admission to you. So the title is actually a lie. I didn't actually collect 82 bucks, if I'm honest. It was 382 bucks. Yeah, so I hope you're really not mad at me for that, you know. Yeah, so, you know, I already heard my introduction. Maybe the only thing I would add to that is just as of a month ago or so, I became an Oracle ACE associate as well. So, you know, just to let you know. But yeah, thank you so much for the nice introduction. Also, allow me to take a moment to thank the organizers, so like Mary, Ron, and also John, who organized this, and also Grubhub for sponsoring, of course. I feel like they all deserve a big applause from us for that. Great, thank you so much. And also I brought some Swiss chocolate over. I think I asked everybody, but feel free to take some more there. Yeah. So I'm also a bug collector, by the way, not only a software engineer. You're laughing, oh, sorry, wrong slide. These kinds of bugs are the bugs that I'm collecting. So you can see my name is really perfectly made for finding bugs because, you know, I have all of these encoding issues all the time. They're really annoying, you know, my cedilla that I have in my name. And in this example, even you can see, even in 2 places of an application, there is on the top no encoding issue, on the bottom there is. So there must have been a mistake there, of course. And then another one here where it says, you know, another encoding issue, but this time a bit differently, where it's just like a question mark instead of the cedilla. I mean, that works too, right? And then there are more of these, of course. You know, this isn't the only example. I've had many of these. But then also you want to go to a web page and you want to check out the frequently asked questions because you're wondering about something. And then you see lorem ipsum all over the place. Really useful, right? Yeah, so and then you have a shipment that is coming to you, and then you see, oh, it's coming in 1969. I mean, it's a nice bug, but I have to say, you know, it's kind of weird. Anyone of you has an idea why this happened? All right, John? Sorry, could you repeat?
That's like time to, well, that's like -1.
Yeah? Yeah.
So it's 0 UTC time, which would translate whatever time you're in, happens to be the day before.
That's one half of the puzzle, but why is it, you know, 69 or 70 instead of like 2020 or something like that?
Well, if you 0 UTC time, that's January 1st, midnight January 1st, UTC time 1970.
Yeah, I think you're almost there. I'm pretty sure that's what you mean. So it's like the default date is probably set to the Unix epoch start, which is 1970. I think that's what you meant, right? Yeah, yeah. Just wanted to make sure. And then, like with the time zone shift, as he correctly pointed out, it becomes, you know, in the past. So yeah, that is the issue there. And then you want to get the domain, and then it says, domain is still available. Get it today before it's gone. And then it says, not available. Great. Yeah. Really annoying. And then you want to add a few days to your delivery, and then you have only object. So which one do I choose now? Well, great. And then you want to scan your boarding pass, but it says boarding pass not recognized, null. Great. What do I do now? Yeah. And then I have more issues with null. Like, for example, here, when I try to enroll my phone, it says my null's phone is enrolled. Great, right? And then there's not only issues with null, but also with undefined and not a number. You know, like we have to be inclusive here. Yeah, you can see quite a lot of those issues. And then you want to check your emails, but then your emails are just simply empty. And no matter how much you scroll, it still stays empty. So that's really annoying. And then you want to create an email account, and you can see here, so the text is in English, but the difference is that the terms and conditions are written in French here, so the message that you have to check to accept them. And this is one of the cases where you might think initially, well, this doesn't seem as like too big of a deal, but this could lead you into some legal trouble because, if you encounter the situation where somebody, sees this and they don't understand it because they don't understand French, then they might just, check it and press create account. And if, you breach the terms and conditions, you could claim, I didn't know that I accepted the terms and conditions because, it was some French text and I don't speak French. Yeah, so and then I'm pretty sure you had issues like this before where you have the dark mode and then it doesn't work properly and you almost can't read the text. Who have you experienced that before? I would say like 2 or 3 people. Yeah, surprisingly, I don't know, maybe I just attract all of these bugs. And then, calculation appears to be something we still don't have quite figured out. And it doesn't go only in this direction, but we also have cases where it's 0 products, and then it says 18 of 0 products. Well, great, right. That doesn't help me much. And then when I mentioned I checked in for Kansas City, I saw this. By the way, Ami is my middle name. So they kind of took my first name and my middle name and simply squashed them together. I don't know why, but that's how it is. Yeah, thankfully, by the way, I still got through the airport, as you can see here. So, and then you might want to order a burger, right? And then you can see this is like an interface that you could get across. And then, I want to click on this plus icon here for the American cheese. And now, think about what would you expect to happen now? I mean, of course, you would expect it to change to 2, which it does. It's fine. By the way, if you noticed, there's a slight shift here. This isn't a bug that I counted here because it's so minor, but layout shift is definitely an issue that you should keep in mind when you're developing applications, especially if they are major. Here it's kind of small and probably unnoticeable to most people, but I'm a real perfectionist. I probably would fix this, but to each of their own. But then I have 2, so it worked properly. So you may be wondering, like, where's the bug now? Maybe there isn't, but probably there is, right? So let's press the plus button again. 0. Okay, that is weird, especially considering that when I was at 1, I wasn't able to click the minus button. It was grayed out. And now, what would your guess be what would happen when you click plus again? I'm pretty sure you're not prepared for what is coming now. Yeah, it's really wild. They didn't consider that, they probably thought, maybe someone wants to have 3.5 cheese, right? Yeah, those are the kinds of bugs that I'm experiencing. Just to show you like how many bugs I found. By the way, those are all bugs that I didn't search on purpose. I remember when I gave this talk at KCDC, I didn't explicitly mention this because to me it was kind of obvious, but someone asked me at the end, what technique I used to find those bugs, and I just told him, well, I was just browsing the internet. I didn't even want to find the bugs. That's kind of, the curse. I'm finding so many bugs, and that's why I started to kind of document them. And you saw the number of 382. These are all of the bugs that I found over the different time span. You see the August is already accounted for, so this month, but of course it's only accounted for up until the start of last week, so there's still some room to grow, but you see it's already at around 15 or 20 or something like that. So we're already starting off strong, depending on what you consider. But yeah, in my opinion, this is my goal is kind of that I'm maybe not able to give this talk anymore in the future at some point, because hopefully, by me giving this talk, the amount of bugs will go down, and then hopefully, eventually, it will be the case that there won't be any bugs anymore, and I can't give this talk anymore. Let's hope that will be the case at some point. Yeah, so these are all bugs that I've simply found by browsing the internet, and also I didn't include any of the bugs that I found or that were reported to me at work. Whether this is to avoid bias or whether this is just because I introduced tons of bugs into my applications is something that's up for you to decide. But yeah, let's do some movements to get the light back. Whatever, I think it's bright enough. It's probably bright enough. Yeah. So we have a bug in the light automation, as we can see, so maybe I should update the chart now. Okay. Yeah. Doesn't matter. Yeah, exactly. That is the chart. Oh, great. Thank you. Great. So yeah, you can see that there are quite a lot of bugs, and you might be seeing that especially it shows that in June this year there were quite a lot of them. There I had like the biggest amount of bugs per month that I ever had so far. I was kind of surprised. I was thinking about why this could be the case, and my idea was that maybe this was simply because of the summer holidays. Maybe people are simply, there are not too many developers still working. Maybe lots of them are on holiday or they wanted to rush out maybe the last release, and that maybe caused more bugs. But if you consider the last year, it wasn't as high, so it seems a bit strange. But interestingly, at the conference where I also showed this talk, someone gave me the idea. He thought, maybe it's due to vibe coding. I don't know who of you is familiar with vibe coding. Okay, that's 4 or 5 of you. So to those that don't know it yet, so vibe coding is like a technique where you don't really code, which is why the title is maybe a bit ironic, but you kind of try to get the AI to bring you to the goal that you want to. So you just prompt the AI with telling the AI what you want it to do, and then you simply observe what it does, and you see if it behaves the way you expected it to, and if not, you give another prompt to steer it in that direction. So you're not really coding anymore, you're kind of having the AI code for you. And you're simply there to check if the vibes are right in a way. And this was popularized around this year in like February, I think, by Andrei Karpathy, who was also an engineer that used to work, I think, at Tesla, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, and if you think about it, there are always the early adopters, and maybe now it kind of reached a point where lots of people are using it. So I think this could definitely be an option. Interestingly, one thing I almost never see people suggest is maybe why don't we use vibe coding to also fix bugs? So let me just give you a short demo here. So if I go here, Codex is, for example, one of the solutions you can use for that, but it's a tool made by OpenAI where you can simply give it a prompt and it will execute it. Of course, you don't have to use Codex. There is also, for example, by Cursor, you can also use its agentic capabilities to do that. Or there is also from Anthropic a solution for that. So here I can just give it a task to do, and I can say, analyze the code base, find a bug, and fix it. And then I'll simply say code, and then we'll let it do its thing, and after the talk, we'll get back to it and see what it did. Maybe we should be doing this a bit more, and then we might be finding, or maybe we are able to also fix bugs with the vibe coding, which could also be like a solution. And also, by the way, you see that I didn't have as many bugs in the earlier stage, and this was because back then I wasn't as seriously collecting the bugs. There I simply took screenshots of bugs that I found kind of interesting, but I didn't do it for all of the bugs that I found. So at the start of 2024, I really started to every bug that I encountered to take a screenshot and to categorize it. And speaking of categorizing it, or more like, maybe also you still notice that it's always roughly above 5 bugs. So it's also kind of interesting to see, I feel like. But speaking of categorizing, what are your guesses? What do you think are the most common bugs that I've found? Just give a few guesses. No ideas? Sorry, can you repeat that?
It looked like a lot of objects weren't rendering of the Java.
Okay, so objects, yeah, that's a possibility. And I also heard string formatting, I think you said. Formatting, yeah, good idea. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Edge cases, good point, yeah. Mm-hmm. Localization, that's also a good one. Yeah. I think edge cases definitely was something I noticed in a lot of those bugs, of course, but you would be surprised how many of them were not edge cases, actually. I didn't specifically differentiate between edge cases and non-edge cases, but yeah. Any other ideas? Yeah? Null pointer exceptions, also good idea, yeah. So let me show you. So on the one hand, I made a categorization first in type and then in subtype. And you can see, I was first a bit shocked how many bugs were UI related. So just to clarify, UI means that those are bugs that I'm guessing that are most likely coming from the front end. Of course, for me, it's not 100% possible to know for sure, was it something that happened in the back end or in the front end. But if you've done full stack development for a while, you know that you can kind of guess pretty well if it's coming from the backend or the front end in most cases. And I mean, even if we took away half of them, you still would be at quite a huge number of them. So, and at first I was a bit surprised, but if you think about it a bit more deeply, it kind of makes sense. If you think about it, at least from my experience, I noticed that in the backend we kind of have unit testing figured out, and I would say that most of us are doing unit testing on the backend side. I mean, I don't know, show hands. Who of you is doing unit testing on the backend? Okay, really? So, really? Okay, that's surprising to me, like maybe half of you. Okay, maybe, I hope I can inspire you to do more by the end of this talk, but yeah, so this kind of, like at least from my experience, most of the people are doing unit testing in the back end, but not really in the front end. So in my opinion, this kind of shows that we should be doing it more. And you can see logic are those that happened in the back end. Error handling is kind of something that can be in both. That's why I didn't explicitly split it up between logic and UI. And the internationalization, as we've seen earlier with the guest, was also a pretty good one. It's pretty high up there. And you can see what surprised me personally was that AI wasn't higher up. I don't know how you feel about that. But just to show you about like some AI bugs I found, because they are not like, they are not really worth like giving like targeted advice to, because I didn't find enough of them simply to give like targeted advice. But this is one of the cases where I was fighting with a layout shift issue that was much more severe as the one that we've seen earlier. And then I said, oh, at some point it's better, but there's still a layout shift. And this was the answer that I've gotten. It looks like you've pasted a bunch of content about Juggernaut Astro Toilet. What? That is kind of weird. I don't know how that happened, but yeah, so. And then you can see here, I've been active around 8 days in the last 7 days, indicating daily usage. So you can maybe even say I'm maybe hyperactive, which is awesome, of course, right? Yeah. And then these are the subtypes. So you can see responsiveness is really high up there, making up the biggest part of the UI bugs. This one kind of surprised me, but of course, since I experienced the bugs, I kind of saw like a trend in this direction. And you can see unresolved templating is another case, glitching, and you can see a few others. So I'm going to kind of pick around 7 of those, and I'm going to show you some ways that you can prevent them. But I feel like it's not enough to simply look at how many bugs, or which ones were the most common bugs. I feel like you also have to look at how many, or how severe the bugs were, not just how many of them you had. So, oh, by the way, here an example of what lack of HTML entity decoding looks like. I'm sure you've experienced something like that before. Like you can see here was my announcement post that I sent to someone in a chat app. And you can see like this I ampersand hashtag 39 colon M filled and so on. So it's really nicely and readable. Yeah, so this is how the lack of HTML entity decoding looks like. I don't know, who of you experienced that before? Okay, like 5, 6 of you? Wow, maybe I just attract all of these bugs. And then character coding issue is just like you've seen earlier, that's what I call character encoding issue. So I kind of separated those two because they, of course, are different. So as I mentioned, the severity. So if you don't have a chart like this at work, I really recommend you to, by the way, if you scan the QR code on the top right, you get to a form where you can enter your name and email address. And then I will send you an email, so you will get an email from me with the slides, and also you will get the recording after it was published, or I'm not sure if it was live streamed, but whatever, the link to that. And feel free to use that at your work. I give you explicit permission to do whatever you want with that. And the QR code will be there on every slide, by the way, so you don't have to do it now if you don't feel like it. But this is like a chart that helps you to define the severity of different bugs. And this is really something I recommend you doing, because the big advantage of doing it like this is that no matter who in your team judges the severity of bugs, you will always get to the same outcome, which is really useful, because usually if you don't have something like this, it's always like, you look at the severity of a bug and you can never tell like if it was, it isn't really consistent. Some bugs are like blockers that should be maybe more critical. Some bugs are more major that should be maybe minor or trivial. And this makes it really easy and takes the guessing game out of it. And this is kind of what I use to judge the severity of the bugs as well in my cases. However, what I did was I didn't consider all of the bugs that were below critical. So I differentiated them between blocker, critical, and then just something else. Because if you think about it, it doesn't really help me much to show you what if the bugs are major or minor or trivial. It mostly is interesting which ones were critical or blocker that made it to production.
Which ones aren't. I mean, essentially, all kinds of bugs shouldn't have made it to production, right? If we look at the merge over time, you may be also able to see something interesting. So you can see here, it noticed that July of this year seems to look a bit different than the others. Here we don't have that many blocker bugs, and it's really the lowest count I've had so far, which is kind of interesting. I mean, you see that already in July of last year, there were not, let's say as many, but it wasn't as low as this year. Again, I'm not sure 100% why this is the case, of course, but my best guess would be that maybe it is just because of the summer holidays, maybe you're pushing less features, and then maybe, you don't have as many features, so you maybe don't break as many things. So, if you have another idea, let me know. I'll mention it the next time I'm doing this talk. And then you can see also if you look at the percentage of critical and blocker bugs per type, and you can see data validation, for example, is one of the highest. So it kind of changes. So, the bugs that are, for example, UI, they don't seem as important anymore. I mean, of course, you should also look at the bugs that occur the most often, but we should also not forget about the bugs that are the most severe. And I kind of tried to take like a good mix of those bugs, like from the ones that are the most severe and the most common ones, to show you some learnings how we can prevent them from making it to production. And again, we have the same chart with critical and blocker bugs, but with the subtypes. And you can see here we have, for example, block without resolution. It's not really a surprise that this is the highest, because block without resolution is already in the name mentioned blocks. And you can see it has top 15 as well. I have 40 subtypes that I categorized the bugs into. So, I just only took the top 15 because else it would be smaller. I hope you can read it, but you are able to look at it on the slides or in the column later. And then to show you like an example of the data validation bug of this one actually. And I'm not sure if you're thinking the same that I'm thinking, but my guess would have was when I've seen this bug, probably it's because of the underscore. Who do you thought the same? Okay, that's me. Cordy, yeah. So, I can tell you, unfortunately, this wasn't the case. So I moved the underscore just to see, does it disappear? No, it didn't. In fact, I also tried to remove the at, even though it is mentioned in the example, but unfortunately, this also didn't make any difference. So I have no idea, I just left it empty. That's how it is. And then we have responsiveness, which kind of looks something like this, where in this example it's more of a blocking issue, I would say, because good luck selecting something in this mess of words. It's really annoying. It isn't usually as severe as it is here, as you have seen on the chart before. But this is just to give an example where it really could become a blocker, where most people probably think that responsiveness probably isn't too much of a deal, but it kind of is in this case. And if you have another example, you can see when I click on manage, it says E in GitHub and net account. But I have no idea what this means. Like, this is the first one. What could it even mean? I mean, the second one is maybe a bit closer, a bit easier to understand. It could be disconnect, reconnect, I don't know, something, it connect, but it mentions my name, so we probably shouldn't reconnect because my account seems to be connected. And then it's like, do you gamble and then simply click on one of these options, or do you, not click it? In this case, I didn't want to risk losing all of the integrations that I was using with GitHub. You never know, maybe it's a disconnect account, and I don't want to then have to show having to all this work again. So it was also really annoying that this was cut up. And one way that you can prevent this is by doing mobile-first design. Who is familiar with that? Like one or two people? So mobile-first design is about, usually when you think about it, when you design something that is working well on a mobile phone in terms of design, it usually also works well for the design when you have it on desktop. I mean, of course, you know, if you have separate design for mobile and desktop, usually that is like the best situation you can have. But if you have to choose, usually starting with mobile first is the better option. It may not be as usable, or it might not be as optimal on the desktop this way, but at least you can use it. At least you don't have any elements that are cut off because you already optimize it for the mobile screen. And this already starts usually at the UX stage. So if you have the UX designer, then usually UX designers already start making the designs with mobile phones. And if you have an application that gets used remotely by at least one person with a mobile phone, then you're able to do such kind of development with mobile first design. And you can see everything that is online. I have a link to it, so if you'd like to learn a bit more about those things, you can, when you get the slides, you simply click on the links, and you can learn a bit more. And then another way that you can implement it is by doing end-to-end testing on mobile devices. So there are a few different frameworks you can use for that. There are two that I would personally recommend. So on the one hand, there is WebDriver.io, which allows you to do end-to-end tests on real devices and also emulators or simulators, which is a really big advantage. Which Playwright unfortunately doesn't have. Playwright has emulation, so it can kind of simulate how it would look like when you have the screen on a smaller screen. So just like as if you would be simply dragging your screen, your phone window, for example, to be a smaller size. It kind of does something similar to that. But of course, this is not as ideal as if you were testing on a real mobile device, because on a mobile device, you have then maybe some issues with different pixel densities or other kinds of issues. So it's always better, if you don't have any kind of tests yet on your mobile, if your application gets used on mobile platforms as well, I recommend you maybe to start with WebDriver.io. If you already have Playwright tests, then please just enable emulation. It's really easy to do it, and it's still better than not having anything at all. If mobile is really a crucial thing, then maybe you can consider switching to WebDriver.io, but do whatever is easiest for you, because maybe doing like a step just like that already helps with I've got something. But one important factor to think about with end-to-end testing mobile devices is you have usually lots of issues with split tests. I'm not sure, so you probably had this issue before where you were pushing something to maybe CI or locally you're running tests, and then they failed. And what do you usually do? You simply rerun the tests, right? And then you see all the tests, they suddenly pass again. Who have you experienced that before? Okay, maybe 5, 6 people. So yeah, so this is an issue I noticed that almost every client that I've been to so far, and every company I've worked for. And this is also why I wrote an ebook on how to fix those latent tests. So if you scan the QR code on the top right, you will also not only get the slides, but you will also get the ebook that I've written for free actually. So now make sure if you're interested in that, you also scan it, and then you can look it up. Hopefully, you don't have to deal with latent tests anymore with that. Alright, then glitching. Glitching is kind of a category of bugs where it's a bit difficult to judge where they are coming from, or usually these are also bugs that are not really reproducible. These usually bugs that are kind of strange, they're just like one-off issues. Just like you can see here, I've written due to a genuine bug, but, and this spell checking tool suggests to me, no, that's wrong. Instead of writing a genuine bug, you should be writing a genuine bug, space bug. Great, right? Yeah, so these are issues like this that are kind of weird, they don't really make sense. Again, what you can use here is end-to-end testing to find that out, but it's kind of difficult to, just by using end-to-end testing to find these, because usually they are issues that are really complex in nature. So one practice I really recommend doing is dog fooding. Who even knows what that is? Okay, so one person, 2 people. So dog fooding is where you essentially use your own applications that you're building. Like with this example here of the spell checking, you would, for example, on all of the employees' laptops install it by default, and then you would encourage the users to give feedback as well on the software when they are using it in the daily work. And also what is frequently done is that when you, for example, have a new release, you first push it to those internal users, and then you get some feedback, and then if you see that everything is going smoothly, you roll it out to the external people that are using it. And this way you can already prevent a lot of those issues from making it to production, because lots of issues were already get supported by the internal teams that are using the app on the day-to-day basis. So this is definitely something I recommend you doing. You can have, but you could also use internally. Of course, that's not possible for all applications. And then there's another one which is called exploratory testing. Who is familiar with that? Maybe one person? Yeah, so it's two people. Yeah, so it's a technique where essentially you are like executing and designing the test case at the same time. So usually this is done by experts, so like maybe some business people that know how the application should work. And then you simply, you have a session, for example, with them where you have a common goal that you define usually, and then they try to follow this common goal to simply find all kinds of bugs that are related to it. And for example, I did a session on like trying to break the application in any way possible, and then it's really like just 1 hour you're trying to just break the application just any way you could imagine, and you would be surprised how many bugs you find this way. The nice thing about this is usually you find bugs that you don't find with automated tests, because usually you tend to, since it's more of a creative activity, you tend to more think about edge cases or cases that you wouldn't think about otherwise if you were doing them in an automated test. I mean, of course, once you caught them, it makes sense to write an automated test out of them, but this helps you to kind of get better coverage. And it's a really fun activity too, so I can recommend you doing it. And then another way that you can fix this is by doing heat map visualization. You can track the user's behavior on the web page, for example, and then you can see, as you can see here, where they most are with the cursor or where they click, for example. And this is really useful because you can see, for example, here, actually, when I saw this, I noticed we have an issue where if you click on the right of the text field, it didn't recognize it. And you can see that quite a few people actually clicked on the right, and it was kind of an issue that was really prominent. Probably, of course, people, once they had this issue, they clicked on the left, and it worked. But still, this is something you can, for example, find out with heat map visualizations. There are two different things you need to separate. One of them are dead clicks, which is sort of the same issue that I mentioned earlier. For example, if you click on the right side of the text field, nothing happens. And this is something that these libraries or frameworks or tools that use heat map visualization, that they will show you. They will specifically tell like someone clicked here and no event handler was triggered, for example. And then oh, maybe I should take a look into this. Maybe, I don't know, there's a logo on the top left of the page, and you have to add a link to the homepage. This is like a common UX pattern, and this is something you can recognize with that. And another one is rage clicks. I'm pretty sure you are familiar with that. You click multiple times to start essentially. I see some people laughing. Yeah, totally. So I actually had this happen just before I came to KCC. So I was packing my luggage. And I'm really clumsy. I don't know if you're clumsy too, but I had the issue where I couldn't find my keys anymore. And like the flight was going, I needed to go to the train, and I simply couldn't find my keys. And since I know I'm clumsy, I have a Bluetooth tracker on my keys. And then I simply opened my app, and I was to click on the ring icon, as you can see here. I press on it, press, and nothing happens. You can imagine how stressed I was at this moment. you book out, miss your flight, and then you can't find your keys. So really, this was really stressful for me. Thankfully, they fixed this like a few days after, after I left for KCC. But I had to manually search my keys. I thankfully found them eventually. But yeah, this is a case where really an issue like this could be really severe. I mean, I could say that I should just not be as clumsy, but I don't know, I just can't do it. And they should just write it off. Alright, and then there's an open source tool here I can recommend. There are many open source tools that I'm a fan of open source, just like I heard earlier. So, Postdoc is one of them I can recommend. Yeah?
I usually don't share cookies, so how do you collect it?
That's a good question. So the question was, so with privacy, usually if you don't, for example, allow the collection of tracking cookies, for example, then it's difficult to do that. Yes, that's a good point. So you need to, depending on the jurisdictions and the laws, you need to ask for consent to be able to track these this way. Here it really makes sense to split up the tracking cookies from the the scripts that is using the different transitions. And I know most users aren't as, I don't know, most users don't go ahead and make sure that they make this on. This is one reason why I think it makes sense to really pay attention to not simply disable or turn down all of the cookies of platform, because some of them might actually help the company fix the issue, right?
But this is not discussion, so it's more like
so as you said that getting is not an essential, and I would agree it's not essential, but I think it can be a lot of cases how to find translation on the moment time. I think especially, if you already have analytics tool in place, most of them already support standardization out of the box, you simply need to check one box for it, and it doesn't hurt because you might still have analytics that can of the users that are allowing cookies in whatever, and then you might still be able to learn from them. So I feel like it's something that's really easy to enable, and that's why I would recommend to do if you, of course, already have that in place. And if you want to make use of it, also something like that, maybe just try it out. I even like most of yourself, or you can use the most instance. I'm not really good then, I just do that with the tool. And also the nice is most of the instance, you can use it pretty generously with a free tier. I think you can say like 80% of customers will pay or something like that. So if you're interested, give it a try. And then we are at unresolved templating. So you can see those are issues like this where you just have simply some text that says underscore not underscore available. So yeah, clearly this was supposed to be either translated if it's multilingual or it was supposed to be just converted from constant into the respective text to show to the user. And then there are issues where it's more severe like this one. So I think when I was starting the conference, I spoke about that. And I arrived quite late, so I had to find a hotel that was open 24/7, at least the check-in should have been able, I should be able to check in 24/7. I was looking specifically for a hotel that had that, and I was looking at this hotel page, and you can see it says, we would like to remind you that the reception is open X on X, out of X on X every day. Which is great, yeah, this was actually the reason why I didn't book this hotel, because I couldn't find out if they had 24/7 check-in. I mean, sure, you could argue I could have called them, but they are in a foreign country, I need to pay more for the call. And also, if there are other hotels that close by that are open and advertise 24/7 check-in on the website, why should I go through the hassle and be going through that I'm calling them? So this kind of shows how maybe unresolved templating doesn't sound really that bad to you, but it could cost someone business, and which is why we should be really careful to mitigate these kinds of issues. And here's another one. You can see, hi, Edwin. I mean, sure, again, here you could say, oh, this isn't as severe, but if you consider here they are inviting you to join a webinar, and just think about it, like how much, at least there's a webinar on how to do something in programming. Like how much do you trust them to have their stuff figured out in terms of programming if they send you a message like that? Probably you would reconsider if you would joining the webinar or not, right? So yeah, this also again shows how something as mundane as this could cause people to maybe use some business. Here what you can do is you can do unit or integration testing. We have only 4 people in this room are doing it, so I really would encourage all of them to do it as well. Yeah, but it's a bit tricky because a lot of people tell me, oh, it's so much work to test all the templates that you have to see if they are really taken place correctly. One technique I recommend often that is really easy to set up and really easy to maintain as well is to simply add a test where you, usually when you have like a generic replacement mechanism, you simply go through all of the templates that you have in a loop that you automate. And then you simply assert if all placeholders are missing. So usually the placeholders are, in some file somewhere, and you can simply use that file and then just run it through in the unit test in an automated way. And then this way you write the response, and at that point you haven't checked if it was correctly replaced, but at least then being replaced is usually a good sign, meaning that usually at least the placeholders aren't there. Even if it's empty, at least like in the ethnic case, it would be better than nothing, right? And this is something again that you can do that's very easy and quick, just because we like to do, of course. that are not complicated. So those kinds of issues. And then again, try to test edge cases, like for example, what happens if you have no value, or if you have a very long value. Someone has a name that I don't understand on. Or what if you have UTF-8 characters, like if I'm registering on the web page. Consider those kinds of cases as well when you're doing testing. Then we have more issues, like here, until the value stage. See, I mean, me maybe as a software developer, I would be able to know what this kind of means, but still, I mean, this doesn't help me if I'm a customer of the website that I didn't develop myself and wondering like, what should I do now? And so in other cases like this, I'm thinking, probably most people aren't able, that aren't software engineers, aren't able to simply check the browser's console. It's really funny, last week, basically, I asked the audience if someone's parents would be able to know how to access the browser's console. One of them put his hand up. Then I asked, are your parents software engineers? Not one of them. Yeah. Yeah, so this really doesn't help you much if you see something like that as a user. So, and it can also be very dangerous, as you can see in this case here. So, already by seeing this kind of error, we can learn lots of stuff about the application. We can learn about it, it's a C# application, and we can also learn from it that it has a path like C users, workbox, and so on. And you can see I even had to censor some stuff to not expose too much information. But you can see it makes it really easy for you to find out if you have another vulnerability that you can use to gain access to the machine. It makes it really easy to find out something where are you running, and it could make it also easier to find out where you could get access to sensitive files. And just by seeing like, this is a C# application, it already limits the kind of vulnerabilities you can maybe check for. This can make it really easy for an attacker to find, an entry into your application, which is one of the cases where we should for sure make sure that it prevents those kinds of issues. And then it can also be a visibility issue, where you can see here, if your coupon was matched the regular expression here, you have experienced something like that before. Okay, one or two people. So, I'm always saying like, maybe I'm just like a unicorn here. Yeah, so you can see, I am able to understand coupon regex, for example, as here. But on the one hand, do I really want to? I'm already not working. And I have already so many regexes I have to look at work. Do I really want to? And who of you likes to read regex? No, but I'm not surprised. Merit Van Dijk, who is Dr. Java champion, she told me once, what is the plural of regex? Regrets. Yeah, so definitely, I can definitely relate to that. So, yeah, I mean, especially if your target user group are developers, then make sure that you don't have error messages like this. And one suggestion I can use to prevent that is you should turn off stack traces in production. Here I really want to put an emphasis on don't only turn them off, but also test if they are off. You won't believe how many times I experienced a case where we thought we turned it off, and then when I tested it, I noticed, oh, well, you have this Nginx or like Apache proxy in between, and that one didn't have it turned off, and then like it still shows some stack traces. So, yeah, really make sure that this really is working the way you expect it to. And in production, it usually is a good idea to only show the errors that you want to explicitly show. So all of the errors that you are handling specifically, make sure that you show them, but all others just show like a generic error message so that you don't see like, as in this case, your server error or like null pointer exception or something like that. And then you can show a generic error message like expected error occurred, please try again later or contact whatever if you should do this. And here, by the way, I really recommend you to put here an email address if you can. I've noticed bugs where they said like, oh, we're having an issue, click here to contact support. And probably as you can think right now is, as soon as you click on contact support, it shows you the error message again, because the website is broken. What a surprise, right? So usually it makes sense in my opinion to, at least, additionally to a contact form, to have a email address there that you can use to contact the people, because this makes it a lot easier to contact you if the website is broken. And what I recommend you doing is, so you can encode in the link some text, for example, that gets pre-filled. So if the user clicks on the email address, they will open, so something will open in their default email application, and it will already pre-fill information like, maybe some console logs, or maybe a trace ID that you can use to figure out what the issue is on your backend. Yeah, so to make it even more easy for people to contact you and give you the necessary information without you having to explicitly ask them back for information. And also, one thing I recommend doing is adding alerting for errors from both the front end and the back end. I see lots of people are adding alerting to the back end, but not many of them are doing it for front end as well. So I would recommend you to send the errors from the front end as well to the back end. I've had cases in the past where this really allowed us to be proactive and already find issues before users reported them to us. I remember specifically in one case, someone had an issue, and the cool thing was as soon as they contacted us and told us about the issue, we were saying like, we will deploy it in 5 minutes, please try it in 5 minutes. And this was of course awesome, because you can only imagine if you're sending a message to a company reporting about, and you're hearing something like this really gives you a really good impression of that company, right? So, and then there's something that is pretty similar to that, which is content debug information, which is like showing debug information. As you can see here, it's showing the SQL statements that is being performed. Clearly, this isn't supposed to make it to the production. And again, this gives you the opportunity to learn about what are the tables named, which when you have a SQL injection attack, you can use to further find out where you can exploit different things, which again is really dangerous. So here again, turn them off, the debug flags for production, and again make sure to test, to make sure that they are really turned off. And don't do this thing where you say like, I'll just for a second enable it, and then I'll go to the page, and then I'll turn it back off again. If you must really in production have something like that, and you can't log it to a log file or something like that, and make sure you use a feature flag where you can enable it for certain users or something like that, and again test it. That works properly. And of course, prevent SQL injection and cross-site scripting, because even if it happens to make it into your application that somehow stuff like this is exposed, you can be rest assured that at least they cannot abuse this in some way. And again, you find some links to some OWASP top 10 cheat sheets, which you can help prevent those kinds of issues if you don't know how to prevent SQL injection or cross-site scripting. This is another case which I've noticed, which is about until debug information. Like here, you can see we find out what the version of Nginx is, which is pretty dangerous. Because you could just go to a public exploit library, like a database, and there are a few of them, and even like an official one. And there you can simply look up what kind of exploits are there for this version, and then you could be simply using one of those exploits, if there are any, of course. Especially if it's like an older version, this is especially dangerous. But just in general, we don't want to expose these kinds of information. Make sure to test that as well. Alright, then we already get to the second last early for today, which is string format. We heard string format from one of the people in the audience as a suggestion. So here in this case, it's about the text not being adjusted depending on which page you are on. Here you can see playing from search my plus way. So I obviously didn't search for my plus way, I searched for my space way. And probably this was used in a query parameter for a URL, and then they simply took that and used it to display it to the content. Again, it's a minor issue, but still it doesn't look great, of course. And another issue that's related to that, especially if you don't have internationalization, then you can see a number of guests, 2 guests. Actually, when I was at the airport I'm not sure if it was in Chicago or in Kansas City, there was like a cool display which showed you like how many stalls were busy at the restrooms. And then I noticed it, and I was like, so 1 restroom's open, which is also, it doesn't look great, right? Yeah, so again, here unit integration testing helps. Really make sure, if you have a case where you have something with numbers that you insert, try and see if it replaces it correctly. And one thing I can recommend you doing is parameterized testing. I don't know, like those people that raise their hands, I hope you're doing parameterized testing. Okay, 2 people? 2 people? Okay. So again, you can click on this link and it will bring you to the JUnit documentation of parameterized tests. This is a really cool way that you can use to define test cases really easily. You can simply define the data that is different, and then you can simply add a new test case, which makes it really easy because you could have a test case and then you can try lots of different cases where you, for example, insert 0, 1, 2, and then you put the assertion right after it. And I also noticed parameterized tests, other developers tend to more easily, or they tend to more just add a new test instead of skipping it entirely when they notice a bug somewhere. Just because you don't have to copy the code of a method, of a test method, and then like paste it, and then think about what is the name now that I'm giving it, and then you're thinking like, oh, next time that you're refactoring something, I need to rewrite the whole class again. You can kind of prevent those issues with parameterized testing. So definitely have a look at it if you haven't yet. Or sometimes it's also called data-driven testing. It's like the more with the generic technique behind it. And also you need to be careful with internationalization, because depending on the language, it is different, right? You know, in English, for example, we say 0 guests, 1 guest, 2 guests, and so on. But maybe in other languages, it isn't the case that this is exactly the same. And this is actually the case, for example, in Slavic languages. They have lots of different differentiations between different like numbers with what changes this results to. So definitely be careful and make sure at least for each language pair you translate into that you write test cases for like the common issues that you could encounter there. And again, test edge cases, you know, like 0, 1, 2, the classics. So then we get to one of the potentially most severe bugs, which is like incorrect or missing information. You can see here I was looking up what the exchange rate was, or like I was converting the yen to Swiss franc. And you can see either we have like a huge problem in economy, or there's a bug. Probably it's more like the latter than the former. But you can see it's an exchange rate of 0.0058, and you can see like we have a huge crash in 0.6. I can't wait until Bloomberg reports about that, right? Yeah, so this of course was only a bug, but if you consider, I mean, I'm seeing here this graph, but I'm not sure if maybe, you know, depending on your phone, you don't see the graph. Or maybe someone has this API attached to their application that they're using to convert from, you know, yen to Swiss franc or some other currency where this bug is affecting it. And then you could be selling something in your online shop where it converts it into a different currency, and it could cause you to lose a lot of money potentially. I mean, probably most of them won't be buying like things in the range of 10,000 or something, but you never know, it could happen. And this could be really dangerous if something like that happens. So here I have another case where you know, I want to buy like liquid PC, and these usually cost like 100 or 200, and you can see it's 24,000. So again, kind of, there must have been some kind of issue there. And here what I recommend you to do is, if you have some data that you enter manually, I would recommend you to use the 4 eyes principle. So it's about you simply have each person that enters data, it doesn't get, you know, published to production immediately, but you have to have another person that looks at it and then, you know, approves it to be able to be published. And then this way you can ensure that if somebody, you know, made a typo in their typing in, then you can prevent this. And so, especially if you have data that is like automatically feed in from an API or something like that, then make sure you add some validation so you, for example, check if the data is significantly different from the previous, if you don't expect the data to change rapidly. Like in the case, for example, before where we had the yen and Swiss franc conversion, you can imagine, I mean, it's possible that there are fluctuations in the exchange rate, but it's not really possible that it will change that drastically, right? This would be one validation to add, and then you could make sure this way that you won't have this kind of issue. Data from an API, especially if you're in a financial application where this really hurts. Perform some plausibility checks. Like again, in the case of the currency, we can say like a certain range where it has been like historically in the last 10 years, for example. Or you can say like, you know, it shouldn't be below 0, it shouldn't be above 1 if it hasn't been in forever. Just things like this. And then also consider what you want to do in case the data happens to violate some system. Like there's multiple things you can do. You can, for example, simply show an alert and then say, oh, something unexpected happened, please try again later. Or you could also, for example, show the old data and show like a note where it says, data might be outdated, keep in mind, try again later for new data or something like that. Of course, it really depends on the use case that you have. Or, you can simply show an error message, and then, of course, make sure you also send an alert to the backend to make sure that you're aware of it, so that you can take care of it and find out what happened. Yeah, and I'm already at the end of the presentation. So before sorry, go ahead. Thank you so much for your attention and coming here, of course. And additionally to the Swiss chocolate, I have one more gift for you before I leave you. I brought some of my stickers, and I'll just go quickly around while we think about some questions to ask. And I'll be happy to answer your questions. And by the way, we will also then be going for a beer afterwards. So if anyone of you wants to join, feel free to join. If you want out, as well as one question there. Multiple points.
Yeah, so when you mentioned the responsiveness, I thought of the responsiveness of the application as opposed to the response to a user action as opposed to responsiveness as in mobile versus desktop. I noticed you didn't actually have any votes for how long it takes to respond, whereas I noticed a lot in practice, like you had a fast food action here. A lot of those I've noticed have problems where you try and do something and it takes so long, you end up with rage clicking, and then you have another issue with the layout jumping, so then you do the wrong thing, and it just turns into a mess and just keeps getting worse.
Oh yeah, I can definitely relate. So just for the audience also at home, so he was saying, when he heard the word responsiveness, he was first thinking about not responsiveness in the way that I meant it, so where it's like about the UI being different depending on the device that you're using. But it's also about like responsiveness could also be interpreted as in that a web page is not really responsive, so it, for example, doesn't react quickly enough. And you mentioned the scenario that probably is familiar to most of you, where, for example, you're on a website and then you simply load the website, it's slow, then you click somewhere and then suddenly there's a shift and the button is up there. Maybe the button to destroy Earth is where you click. And then we have a real problem. Yeah, so this is definitely something that happened to me too. I didn't really count this bug in a way because it's really difficult to track, I guess. But this definitely happened, but I have to say that it got better recently. I don't know if you experience that much.
I don't know why, but all the apps, like Taco Bell in particular, was really bad there for a while. Now it's mostly working. McDonald's was getting really bad, they got a bit better. I don't know what they did, they just scaled up resources.
Who knows? I mean, it could also be just a bad internet connection, like when you are on a mobile device, when you are, I don't know. For example, I know this isn't really a deal for the US, but for Switzerland, being like a case where you have tons of trains and then tunnels, where you have issues that you go into a tunnel and then you suddenly don't have connection anymore. This could still be causing some issues. But yeah, they're actually, what I would recommend to prevent these is a technique which isn't that often used, I feel like.
To be able to acknowledge the action while you wait for it to load. To be able to acknowledge the action while you wait for it to load. So there's different ways, like if you tap on something, you can change the coloring, show that it's been activated, or you could have a little loading spinner or something, just to show that the user response has been acknowledged.
Yeah, good point. So she said that, I think does everyone have a speaker? Anyone of you missing one? Okay. So, you mentioned a good point, like you can simply make sure and add like a progress bar, or I recommend usually it's also like adding a skeleton, for example, if the page is still loading, where it's like, it looks like a placeholder of the application. But what I meant was more like, how can you find those issues if you're not aware that you have them? Because often this is something that people are not really aware that they have. And here it helps, like I remember on the one hand, a friend of mine, I know this is maybe a bit more tough for people in the US, but he used to often test applications, or like he used to just go on a website, developing, finally on the train, or it was going into tunnel, for example. The other technique that you can use is crowd testing, where you essentially, there are services where you can submit your application tested by a huge crowd of people. Like, for example, there are services where you can have it tested by everywhere in the world, for example, if your application is supposed to be multinational. And also, then you have cases where people will inadvertently get into a situation where they might be in a situation where they have bad internet, or you could also give in the instructions the problem that they should also try to try it with a mobile phone, maybe where they have reception and so on. Then you get lots of different reports from multiple different people, and then you can find out where you have those issues. Again, did you want to ask a question like that, or did you just want to find out?
I was afraid that something that I had to get there.
Oh,
It was a huge problem. I noticed even that, the examples I gave, like pre-ordering apps, they're often the same interface on kiosks that are in the store, which have the exact same delay problem.
Oh, okay, so even he has cases where he had like kiosks in some stores where they have the exact same issue. Then at this stage, this is really not a solvable issue anymore. This is really a big issue that should have been caught. But that's what I feel like notice when I have applications that are mostly tested like with Ethernet connection that you have in the office. Maybe the home office is not that bad of a thing to because it's just as a way of like listening to the testing ground. But yeah, one thing you can also try is you can, of course, if you have a web application, simply, I know for example the Chrome developer tools have that where you can say like slow regime network path and then it will slow down the internet connection. Then you can also catch some bugs this way. Of course, it's not as active as if you were actually having that connection. There's also another one, actually I have a talk about this, it's called testing toolbox. I gave it a JCon. If you scan the QR code, I mean, you really have it again. I'll make sure and I'll write an email and, also send you the talk of that one because that one includes an example where I use toxic proxy. I'm not sure who you knows that. Oh, wow. Great. This is a tool that I discovered. It's basically a proxy that makes sense. It's developed by Shopify and it's open source. It's really cool. It allows you to essentially place your machine between a proxy and where you're using it. And then what you can do is you can simply define that, for example, let's say you want to proxy to your database. You can say that every with a 50% chance you want the connections to be failed, or you want to say that the chance of 10% the connection is troubled in some way, or you want to say that there's some corruption happening. This way you can simulate some kinds of issues. I found this tool because I ran into this issue where in production we had an issue where our database temporarily lost connection, and this caused like a massive flood of alerts being sent out, which was really annoying because we had hundreds of thousands of notifications on our phone. It was really bad, of course. And also we noticed that the database, the backend was constantly crashing and restarting because of that. This was something we never experienced because we always, during development, had the database started automatically with development, and on the deployed environments, we always had the case that the database were available, right? But we didn't account for that there could be, of course, the issue, even if you have liability, you can still run into the case that you might have a case where other environments have some issues. And then you can find those issues where they're also useful for them. Yeah, did that answer your question? Yeah, thanks for noticing. As I mentioned, I didn't include this into the box here, but it would be something interesting. I didn't even think about it as a part of it. You're kind of right. It should.
It's way too often for quite a while there. Everything is so slow. So
Yeah, thanks for sharing your experience.
I see you have catch so many nice work. And in your bug discovery patterns, have you used any tools or any automation to identify those common patterns, or is it just your own discovery of finding those?
Can you ask me if I used any tools, for example, to find the bugs?
Or any frameworks?
Or frameworks, whatever. I didn't use any tools or techniques because I just used websites and I just encountered those bugs. I didn't want to, but it was really annoying and just happens. Yeah. So I didn't try to find the bugs on purpose, which is why I think this bug is, just like this talk is even more relevant, because if I was specifically searching for them, I feel like it wouldn't be as valuable, the kind of advice that I'm giving you, because it's probably inflated because I'm looking for errors that probably don't exist, right? But it's really errors that I experienced while I was using any kind of websites that I'm using daily, right? Does that answer your question? All right, thank you. Any other questions? All right. Else we can, go for the beer. Thank you so much again for, being here, and I hope you learned something new. Now we can win something. My stickers aren't as nice as the two IntelliJ licenses, I have to say that. I can't compete with that. But I have Swiss chocolate, that's at least a little bit, better. Should I stop sharing?
That's true.
Yeah.
I also have some Java stickers.
I just remembered we forgot to look at the codex example. Could you maybe quickly look at that one?
Sure.
I think at least probably, I think you would find this interesting as well. Just let me quickly show that. So remember we did this this exercise where I was asking it to find the bug and fix it. And you can see here it showed me an error where it says connected the error serializer to pass an increment depth value for each recursive call. And I think that is kind of a good catch in a way. For example, like here it increases the depth here, but it could be that potentially here we exit or like we continue the loop in a different case, and then maybe we could not increase depth, which is why this one is nice. So you see this way you can find some bugs, and I really encourage you to try the same on your applications. All right, so sorry, Mary, now you take over. All right. Yeah, that's good.